Advancing research and discoverability with partnerships and AI here in Frankfurt. Welcome, everybody. Last year in this same studio, Guido, Herrmann and Rafael Ball, who are amongst our panelists today, were discussing in conversation about the future of publishing, challenges and opportunities, the publishing ecosystem facing challenges and potential opportunities, and of course about open science transformation that is in this ecosystem that is such an enduring and important topic for all of us. 1 year on, these topics continue to be as relevant as ever, and we have an opportunity now to see how the conversation has progressed, and particularly how discoverability is a key driver in transformation and transition to an open science world. It's clear that publications that are accessible via OA can be read and disseminated and used more widely and more quickly by others. For researchers, this increase both in the quality of research and scientific progress overall. It also allows much wider access outside of the scientific community. To discuss these premises, we have a panel of publishing and open science experts here today, who will be sharing their insights with us. It's my pleasure to introduce you to them. So I'll start right next to me on the right, Rafael Ball, our panel's moderator. He's the director of ETH Zurich Library and has long been interested in what the library of the future will look like and how digital development shapes the devolving role of print books. Today's topic is close to his heart in understanding where and how discovering scientific content will shape the future of libraries. Next to him, we have Guido Herrmann. He is the managing director of Wiley's German operations and senior vice president of Wiley Partner Solutions. In his role as leader of this Partner Solutions group, he has become particularly interested in how tech solutions can enhance discoverability and accessibility and influence and impact our journey into an open science world. Right next to him, we have Liz Ferguson, Senior Vice President of Research Publishing at Wiley. She will be known to very many of you, pretty much to all of you, because she's been an ambassador and advocate for open science for quite a number of years, and is really well known in the community as supporting the open science agenda. So we look forward to hearing from her. And then last, but by no means least, we have Ben Townsend, Senior Vice President of Sales and at Wiley. And in this role, he has been instrumental in shaping some of the most important transformational agreements Wiley has struck in the last few years, and so knows firsthand how important it is to make research content accessible on a large scale. So we have representatives here from editorial, sales, and people who can talk about tech aspects, about accessibility and discoverability here. And so we are looking forward to a very stimulating, interesting discussion. With that, it's my pleasure to hand over to Rafael, who will be leading the panel discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure for me to be the moderator here and to moderate this wonderful panel. And before we going into the detail, we will have an introductory statement from each one to interesting topics on the topic of discoverability, transformation of publication system. And I start with Guido.
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you also again for hosting us today. I think that we are talking about artificial intelligence, discoverability, the services that we provide as librarians, as publishers to our constituency, the researchers. I believe there are two main things about which I might be happy to talk about later in more detail. I think the one is discovery. I believe that artificial intelligence will greatly help us to improve discoverability of the content through various means, and I will be more than happy to talk about this later during our panel conversation, which I believe will greatly enhance the services to the researchers we are trying to serve worldwide. I think the second great impact of artificial intelligence will be on the integrity component, that artificial intelligence will help us in numerous ways to improve the publication process, to drive up integrity, to enhance services for the authors, to drive out costs and other things. So I believe today would be my 2 cents, Rafael. Artificial intelligence and where we're going is a very big theme. I believe there are already very practical applications that we can already see on the horizon and where we at Wiley investing and already operationalizing.
Guido, thank you very much. I think artificial intelligence is not only a very helpful tool and a very helpful technology, but it is also a buzzword, and we have to be careful to talk about artificial intelligence on every point of our view and of our business. Let me ask you a further question, Guido. How will you define discoverability? What is discoverability? Is it more than access to information? Is it more than a search engine optimization? Does discoverability mean finding the information as a needle in the haystack? What is your definition of discoverability?
Thank you, Rafael. I think you already addressed the issue. I believe we are talking about open access for many years now. And the implicit hypothesis is once it's accessible, once it's open access, it's been taken care of. I don't think so. I think we need to look much closer at the reader in the equation and to really look at discoverability. And I think discoverability has many dimensions where technology will help. Finding things through search engines, you mentioned SEO. But then I believe accessibility has another dimension, is bringing scientific content to audiences who currently don't have the opportunity to enjoy that content. And as we all know, there's the European Accessibility Act, which enforces us publishers, and we at Wiley, we already have done that, making content available to those who have a vision impairment, about 2 billion worldwide. Making content available to those who have suffered hearing loss, making content available to those with cognitive and learning disabilities. And there are many technologies already in play, which we are using. I'll just name a few: enhanced image resolution, speech to text, graphic to text, plain language summaries, which might also help researchers. If they go into a field they're not completely familiar with, they could use the machine to literally throw in a scientific article into the slot and get back a plain language summary. Convert PDFs, convert archive materials into searchable materials. Language becomes gets a whole different dimension now, right? Immediate translation, searchability across languages, and then finally multimedia content discovery. So I believe, Rafael, that when we go from open access to discoverability, we are just starting to explore all the possibilities. And I believe that we as publishers and librarians, if we make those part of the infrastructure, will greatly enhance the researcher's potential.
Guido, thank you very much. I go inside your discussion, and you talked about open access. You talked about partnership between libraries and publishing houses. I have heard a breaking news, ladies and gentlemen, a few minutes ago concerning open access, concerning publishing, concerning transformational agreements with a big country in Europe. Guido, can you explain what does it mean?
Thank you, Rafael. It's very fortunate that Liz, Ben, and I today can share that we have reached agreement with Project Deal, that we would extend our contract that goes back to 2019 for another 5 years, from the year 2024 to 2028. That 5-year contract will include a publish component. That contract will include a read component. That contract will also include the infrastructure investments we have made together with Max Planck Digital Library, both on the author side, on the librarian side, providing dashboards. We will be further providing initiatives and supporting initiatives such as Deep Green. And I think Liz will share a little bit about our arrangements with Deal around the publishing component, and then Ben will then share the agreements a little bit more in detail around the read component.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Guido. This is tremendously exciting for us. As you can probably imagine, it was exciting first time round. It's just as exciting this time around. If you're already Googling, looking for more information, don't just yet. You're hearing this before anything goes out publicly, and it's probably better 3 hours too soon than a minute too late to be able to inform the audience here. The publishing components of this are somewhat different. They move us on a generation from the first agreement that Wiley conducted with Deal 5 years ago. So you'll see in the detail of the agreement, once we begin to talk about it and put that information out there, that the agreement allows us the German research community, the German institutions and research funders and so on, to recognize the value that is delivered by journals that have significant amounts of investment and impact associated with them, in impact in all its forms. It also concretes the place of scholarly societies in the transition to open access. And then it puts a different light on other journals that provide a deeply valuable service to authors nonetheless. Authors will continue to be able to publish in both hybrid journals using a PAR fee, but differently structured this time around, and also in full gold open access journals, very similarly to last time. We'll be continuing to build on the infrastructure that we've developed that supports authors as well as institutions to make their process of engaging with this and all the benefits that open access brings even easier, reducing the number of authors who opt out. It's very small already, but we want to get it down to 0 and make sure that everyone is convinced of the value that agreements like this can bring.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, hello, hi. Just to add to what one of my colleagues have shared, so we're obviously very proud and excited about what we've reached agreement with Project Deal, and in terms of the access to Wiley content, that will also remain a continuation of what has been provided before, so comprehensive access to our content. And I guess in keeping with the conversation a few minutes ago about discoverability, that ties straight back to that we want to make sure that the content in a conventional, practical way is discoverable, but also because I think we all recognize the importance of the ability to read and discover content as part of the continuum that represents scholarly discovery and dissemination. You need to be able to have access to read and digest in order to create the scholarly content of the future. But the last thing I would want to add as well with regards this agreement that we've announced here on this panel is that in many ways, the 5 years have just gone by. The past is almost but the prologue to what comes next. And we're very excited about building even more a successful future here in Germany and beyond.
Thank you very much. Congratulations from my side. It's good news for the whole scientific community that there is a deal and not a no deal, because I repeat permanently, a no deal is not a deal, but it is the end of any negotiation. So I'm happy that there will be access to the information and knowledge of Wiley content, and that there are publications possibilities for the country, and that you find a compromise and a good deal with the partners. Alice, you are responsible for the publication strategy with Wiley, and coming back to the topic of advancing research integrity and discoverability, combining with the new deal you have announced actually now a few minutes ago, the content in the open access world, which is the opus operandi for Wiley, is not longer behind a paywall. Instead of this, the publication process, as it complete, is behind a paywall. So I ask you, what is worse or better for science? What is the better path to open science? Content behind a paywall or publication process behind a paywall? Yes.
Now there's a question, Rafael. Thank you very much. We just in case you're wondering, we have not been made available of these questions in advance, and I wasn't quite anticipating something like that. I think there is very good reason for the process, all the processes that are part of the scientific and research endeavor, to be made much more transparent. We're developing some new tools at the moment that help researchers kind of extract meaning and metadata from their manuscripts at the point of submission, so that it smooths the pathway for them, but also makes it much easier for us to identify upfront, for example, is this author entitled to a transformative agreement at an earlier stage in the process? We've seen the challenges and the opportunities that AI can bring in publishing. And it's a bit of a cop-out, but there is a very mixed world ahead of us, I think, for the next 3 or so years. We're embedding AI tools in that to help surface ahead of time problems that might exist in manuscripts when they're submitted earlier in the process, and typically catching them post-publication. I do believe overall we need a shift, and this is the responsibility of more than just publishers, to a much more open world, full stop. One of the ways in which we can all guarantee greater integrity in the research record is to require sharing of data That's a pretty obvious one. We've been talking about it for many years, but the rates of participation in open data sharing remain incredibly low. And that's in part because it's a significant lift, both behaviorally or culturally, for authors to want to make that step, and also in terms of the work that's required to do it. So finding simple and effective means of doing that is important. We have a number of projects in which we are opening up more of the process of peer review. So making the peer reviews themselves publicly available, making the process of peer review so you can see all of the different editorial interactions through the transition of a manuscript openly available. Those seem to be going research community by research community. And I think if we try to force it too soon, we'll lose the goodwill of those that we're all reliant on. But making sure that we're showing the advantages every step of the way is critical to making people engage in those sorts of activities. We know, and we had some statistics earlier, open access articles are more frequently downloaded. For us, it's nearly 4 times as many. They're more frequently cited. It's nearly twice as many. The altmetric attention goes even higher. We need to find equivalent forms of payback on an author's investment in the time it takes to put more of themselves and more of their work out there in the public domain.
Let me give a question for Ben. I think it could be an answer which you would give to my question as well. Ben, you and your sales force actually selling content and EPCs. It depends from the part of the world and it depends from the contracts you have. In how many years your sales force will sell only APCs, and in which time period your sales force will not sell anything, but the company Wiley, as a content producing publishing house, will get the money from somewhere else? You understood? Do you understand my question?
I do. Thank you. Yes, I think that comes back to what I was saying earlier about the past being the prologue here. I was introduced as having been close to some of the biggest transformative deals that Wiley has done, and I think the clue is in the name, transformation. We are still in that process of transformation, and as a business, in terms of the commercial proposition, if you like, that's still evolving. To your point. And I think this goes for the entire publishing industry and not just Wiley. I think it's incumbent upon us to be able to be open, again, about the value that we bring to the scholarly ecosystem, so that it's not just simply a conversation that we have with our partners about providing access or providing publishing. It's far more holistic than that we need to be discussing about our role as publishers in the advancements of science, whether that's around some of the things that we talked about around the publishing process, but also I think we have a responsibility also to drive openness of standards, to be able to standardize the way in which publishing is conducted, whether that's around, again, using some of the words already, metadata, or it's around making sure that the preservation of content is continued. So I think there are ways in which we already bring value that we need to make sure that we are open about and are clear about, and from a commercial perspective, held accountable to deliver on those elements of value. So if you were to, as I think you may do, press me on what I think the future may look like, I think there's far more of a service-oriented approach to the way in which publishers interact with our customers. And as I said, it's incumbent upon us to demonstrate that value through the services that we provide. There are many things that we do already in our transformative agreements that I think would point to that future. We do a lot of work in some of those around advancing the understanding and the discoverability, perhaps, of how to be published and how to be published well, whether that's through early career researchers or those new to submitting of content. But there's also things that we do where we work very closely around the discoverability of content in certain places that perhaps don't have had that access readily available either. So I think, again, to me, the concept of service is one that is our future as a commercial organization.
Guido, you have to add something?
Yeah, thank you for your question earlier, Rafael. You were alluding to basically who's paying. And I just wanted to add something from a very German perspective here. I believe there has been an excellent paper published by the Wissenschaftsrat, which is the highest science body in Germany, last year, a paper on the future of open science, open access in Germany. And that paper was created by Professor Jeremiah. He's also heavily involved in Projekt Deal. And I think he made some very good observations, and it was not just him, a whole group of researchers. They made the recommendation that going forward, the cost of publication should be tied to the research funds provided to a researcher, simply because they scaled in line. A researcher has a lot of research funding, has then also more means to publish. And then I would, with that paper in mind, and those who haven't read it in Germany, I can really only recommend to study it. I think it's a very substantial paper. And then going back, Rafael, you asked, should the author pay or should the reader pay? If you read this paper from the Wissenschaftsrat, I believe the funders should pay. Those who support research will pay. And why? Because we are creating a shared infrastructure here. It's a digital science, open access, shared infrastructure, services, technology will need to be brought, and somebody has to pay for it. And if we follow the recommendation of the Wissenschaftsrat, it will be tied to the research grant, and that should provide sufficient funds to the community to build that infrastructure. And then we get out of this, I believe, very narrow question, should the author pay or should the reader pay? We would say we build a science infrastructure in Germany collectively.
Thank you very much. Coming back to the question of discoverability and Wiley solution ideas, Guido, there is a European standard, the European Accessibility Act. I guess not everyone in the audience may know what it is. Can you briefly explain what does it mean and what is it for you in Wiley to fulfill or to react on this Accessibility Act?
Thank you, Rafael. I already alluded to that briefly earlier, so I think I can keep my comments here also brief. There's a law in Europe that actually by this year, content needs to be made accessible, not to certain communities, those with a vision impairment, those with hearing loss, those with cognitive disabilities. And I believe this is exactly the right direction we should be going. And it also underlines the constant need for investment into the infrastructure. So when we say open access, you could say, well, it's all about putting PDFs online and what's the big deal here? And I don't think so. I think collectively we have to build this infrastructure. And this European law basically makes it very clear that accessibility and discoverability goes beyond the researcher. It should be available to the society in general. And I believe it's just another flavor. I mean, there are other flavors in the US, OSTP, for instance, that take a completely different approach, but it's also going in the same direction, that we make science, the output of science, available not just to researchers, but to special communities, but also then obviously to industry to enable discoverability here. So I think there are many themes. And for us at Wiley, it really means consistently investing in the infrastructure and also in our case, making the infrastructure available to our society partners and other publishers.
Thank you very much. Preparing this panel discussion, I read a lot of new ideas which Wiley has and discuss. For example, the optimization and the enhancement of the submission process or the peer review process. For example, the screening for integrity or the automated processes, which also helps with the help of AI tools which can be used to uncover data fabrication, image manipulation, paper mill production, and so on. Really big problems. And my question is, perhaps it is for Liz or for Ben as well, for Guido, is this the end of an intellectual peer review process? Do we still need the mass of scientists who work through and evaluate all these many submissions if you have developed wonderful automated tools which can prove and clearly say a good one, appropriate one, it belongs to this discipline or that, and we publish it with this journal or that?
I don't think we will see an end to human peer reviewers until the machines are the only ones responsible for the input in the first place. We absolutely still need expert peer reviewers with knowledge of their domains and their disciplines to help contextualize the additional insights or the perhaps different insights that the machines can give. And there's no doubt that they can and they can be helpful. We've been talking for many years about the crisis in peer review and the amount of the sheer volume of review and numbers that are needed to assess the ever increasing number of submissions that all publishers are receiving globally, the challenges involving the truly global community of researchers in that enterprise as well. There's a few ways in which we're looking at this. So one of them is that the methods that we currently ask authors to endure when they're submitting manuscripts to us and to other publishers too, and to our society partners are painful. They take too long. They need to be significantly faster, more intelligent. They need to be at least as fast as an author's own ability to type on a keyboard. And I know from my own use of those review systems that they're often not that fast. So we're developing a new submission system. It's already rolled out on a number of journals that, as I mentioned earlier, does extract metadata for an author when they upload a manuscript and plays it back to them and allows them to confirm whether that metadata has been successfully or unsuccessfully extracted, rather than expecting someone to key in 8 different names and addresses and all the different pieces of information that go along with that. We are increasingly layering in the ability for detection of things like SciGen and MathGen and looking for other forms of Gen AI content in a manuscript. And here again is where we need that human form of assessment. Not all Gen AI contributions to a paper are necessarily bad. It's the way in which it's used, whether it's properly acknowledged by the authors, as to whether we can properly consider that a reasonable part of a manuscript or a very problematic part of the manuscript. And this is what I meant earlier when I said we're in for a period where we're going to see both good and bad, and where I suspect Gen AI is going to be ahead of us as publishers for a period of time. There'll be that mixture of fair is foul and foul is fair going on. And that's true also of the efforts around research integrity that we have to make, where we have bad actors coming into play who are increasingly ahead of us every step of the way. And unless we use machines to our benefit, those machines are being used to our deficit. So we absolutely have to apply them to the problems of image manipulation, scope checking, making sure that the citations that we're seeing in the references list are, whether they're associated, for example, with retracted articles, whether they're linked to journals that actually don't exist or are otherwise predatory or hijacked. And in a latest development that came out just last week, whether there are stacked hidden metadata for citations that aren't actually visible in the manuscript and go out elsewhere. So we as an industry need to start using the machines to our advantage. But I do not see a time in which we don't require that level of human interaction that gauges the quality of a piece of work. And by that, I'm not talking about, is it completely unique and novel and so on, but where does something sit in the canon of literature that we're all responsible for?
Yes, Ben.
Well, I just wanted to add an observation on top of what Liz has said. She replied very eloquently with detail, but it does make me think of the difficult balance that we're trying to find here, where we talk about the importance, and we all know this about the importance of what's at the very heart of what we do is quality. We want to publish quality content, and we don't want that to be undermined in any regard. That's so important to all of us in our industry. But at the same time, when I think about the transformation agreements that we strike, a lot of that, let's be honest about it, is taking advantage of scale. Big company economics is how we generate that value and that interest, and we're able to deliver what we need to deliver. So there's this balance that we need to find between maintaining the quality that we have and the selectivity that we have, but at the same time being able to drive at scale, to drive fast in order to get where we want to be in the transformation. So it's a balancing act, but it's one that is the responsibility, I think, of all parties to try and maintain that integrity.
Thank you, Guido.
Yeah, thank you, Rafael. I wanted to add two components to your question about future of peer review. The one is on scale. So a simple math tells you the following. If you have a rejection rate of 50%, and if you need 2 peer reviewers for each article, basically you need 4 for each published manuscript, right? Because 2 get rejected, the other one, so it's 1 to 4. Now, we all know publication increases roughly 6% every year, 5%, 4%, depending on circumstances. So you do the math that there's just not enough peer review capacity out there currently. And then that, I believe this problem will be compounded going forward because over the last 15 years, we have seen China entering the market. China is now, I believe, the leading nation in science in terms of outputs, certainly, but also in terms of quality. And so China coming into the market, luckily so, we are very happy that the Chinese can make so many contributions to science that puts stress on the peer review system by the sheer numbers. Now we are talking about global south. I'm hoping that also the global south will come into the research community in the same way China came in. So that would add another maybe 2 million publications going forward. So you see the problem here. So I think what Liz was saying, that we need a much better machine, a much better intelligent machine simply to support the process, just looking at the numbers. The second comment I would like to make is on the quality. So obviously we do a lot of research on what provides value. And when we ask authors, it's clear more than 90% of the authors say the peer review process adds value. And it adds value not just by weeding out the bad stuff, but it adds value by really encouraging the author to think harder about their problem, by pointing out weaknesses in the process, by, in a way, starting a conversation if it's really a good peer review process. And so I believe, adding on what Liz said, if we can take out as much of the work that can be taken out by the machine and then enable that quality level in the peer review to really make research better, I think that's an excellent future. And this is to answer your question. This is where I see it. The machine should do as much as possible. And then the human researcher can really add the value that makes a difference to make it a better paper. That's, I believe, the idea of peer review.
May I switch to the REX system we have developed? From the REX system is a publication submission system, exchange research system, and there are a lot of tools also implemented for making the submission easier and make it smooth for the authors to submit their papers to the publishers. I thought about it that a lot of publishers will do this. They will improve and enhance the submission system and make it easier for the authors to submit the paper. And I have a very visionary question. Perhaps it is a naive question. My question is, could it be, in today's completely automated and AI-driven world, even in the submission process, a USP for Wiley to have a human-involved submission process, so that at the interface is not artificial intelligence, wonderful enhanced tool, but there is people, a man or woman sitting, helping the author download their paper, making everything available for him or her, and this could be a USP because Elsevier and Springer has automated system, and Wiley will have a human interface for the submission process.
That's a very interesting question. We do have many humans in our buildings, I'm pleased to say. We employ hundreds of people with PhDs and postdoctoral experience who help run a very good number of the journals that we operate. So those are both people who act as editors-in-chief themselves and select manuscripts for publication, find reviewers, lead the development of the scope of their journals, and have their hands in the submission system, whether it's REX, which is that more automated one I referred to earlier, or one of the ones that we're migrating from at this point. We also have many people, hundreds again, some of whom have PhDs, some of whom have master's degrees, undergraduate degrees, who are there to support the process for authors, reviewers, and editors alike. So the easiest way for people to engage with the submission process, and the way that I think many authors have become accustomed to it, is to go to a website and upload manuscripts. We need to make that simpler and easier. We know that people get stuck, they have questions, they may not know how to fill something in. Making that process as seamless as possible is ideal, so that, much in the same way Guido described the role of the reviewers to kind of act above the machine and add the real value, our people are there to help when the machine isn't that intuitive for them. It may be their first time using it, or they have additional questions because a paper appears to be stuck in a process, or because they want a little bit of help with someone with just enough subject knowledge who can help them understand what a reviewer or what an editor is asking them to do, and 3/4 of the way through the peer review process. So again, I see both in the same way that Guido described for the review system. The machine is there to make things simple, efficient, quick, and effective for as many as possible, while still making sure that the people are there to interact with when it's necessary.
Maybe just to add one additional thought here. I think there's also, when we talk about peer review, obviously things are moving quite fast here. And when we do market research again with author, we know the number one thing authors are asking for is speed. So when they submit an article, one of the main decision criteria is it fast? They don't want to stay in the dark for weeks. So there's a little bit of a tension here between doing good, thorough peer review and being fast. And one should try to do both. And the machine here can help again. Then, obviously, I think we also see lots of experimentation here around peer review with preprints. Right. And I personally see, and Liz probably is better suited than I to comment here, we see peer review increasingly being blurred as a preprint becomes not a separate kind of like outlet. It just becomes part of the publication process, right? So that we are moving to a world again, which is fully connected open science, that a publication starts as a preprint. And then we have seen quite a number of very interesting experiments here, right? eLife has done something to change the peer review process substantially. And then it kind of like morphs into a publication version of record. The data dimension maybe runs in parallel, where we see much more open data. So the question, when does the peer review happen and how, might also change if we move more into a collaborative open science dimension. But again, the number one ask, if we ask an author, what are you asking for, they would say speed when it comes to peer review.
And I understand it is a mass problem, of course. But my horror vision is that one day in the whole process, the human being is kicked off. The author is produce a paper. By help of machine, he or she disseminate it, put it in a submission process. The peer review is automated, and at the final end, the paper is written by a machine to be read by a machine. And this could be a shortcut, and there will no mankind in the process in this system. And this is perhaps an idea, because a lot of the papers are not cited, are not read by people, but by machines, by abstracting systems. And so we see a tendency in this direction. And this is the reason why I asked this question concerning the submission process and concerning the peer review.
If I may ask you, Rafael, how do you see librarians in the process here? Because we are now talking more about artificial intelligence systems, right? Reading, discoverability. Do you see a role? Sorry for the spontaneous question, but do you see a role of librarians here in this process? Where's the human interaction on the library side?
This has to be my next question for you, Guido, but I will answer to it, of course. Yes, I'm sure libraries will be a partner in this process for the next 10, 20 years. Libraries still no longer will be buying content and put it on their staff or on their servers, and they are not happy only by paying APCs to the publishers, but they will partner in this whole publication process. They will help authors to find the best format to publish, to find the best journal or book or publisher to perform with his or her knowledge to support this process. Perhaps one day the library will help in the submission process or help organizing the peer review process. I think the library coming from a literature-oriented library to the information-oriented now is a data-oriented library, and we coming from the content organizing library to a publishing supporting library. And at this point, we are very close to the change or transformation of the publishing industry as well. So not only the publishing industry is going in a new phase, but also the libraries has to go. And if a library will not follow this change, they have a a bad future, in my opinion. So we will be partners, even if we do not want. We will be, and we have to be, Guido. This was my question on this point, because the partnership between libraries and publishers is very old. It's a lot of 100 years old, and we were very close, interconnected for preparation, for finding, for disseminating, for selling and archiving these materials. And my question to you all is, what is the future of this partnership between libraries and publishers in a time of open science? Really, not talking about open access, but open science. This is even a step ahead.
I was agreeing inwardly with everything you were just saying, and I think it kind of, you've almost answered some of the points there for me in answer to your question. I think that for me, and I think for all of us, the role of the library as the archivist is one of legacy, and that the role of the librarian in particular is one almost as a guide. It's a guide for the scholar in order to reach and attain the heights that they need through publishing, and the sustainability of scholarship itself. The librarian has a fundamental role in that, and I think, again, going back to what I've experienced with the transformation agreements, for those to be successful, at the heart of it is that partnership with the librarian in so many aspects. It's about yes, it is still about discoverability in the legacy way, with content and with enabling people to publish without friction, but it's also making the right choices, as you've just described, Rafael, about the right choices for that individual to publish their work in the most effective way, reaching the audience that they want to reach. But again, using a word I used earlier, the librarian has an absolutely critical role in driving standards in our industry. And for everything that we've talked about to see successful, that's got to be a focus point for all of us together. And I think the librarians are perfectly positioned in order to advocate and drive for what those standards should be around all aspects, whether it's metadata or even peer review processes as well. So I think that the word I use, I think, is the guide, the advocate, the standard bearer. The librarian has many, many roles to fulfill, and certainly not just the archivist of the centuries gone by.
I would add one of the most important elements here. It takes us back to one of the earlier themes. I mean, we burn daylight hours, nighttime hours, thinking about how to engage authors in more open science practices. Librarians do the same. Openness, transparency, the kind of standards that Ben was talking about. Here's where I think we can be truly complementary in our actions and work very constructively together, as opposed to some of those dynamics perhaps a little bit further in the past, where there was greater tension between librarians and publishers. So I think there's a great deal of opportunity for collaboration in that kind of emerging space.
Guido?
Yeah, maybe one example, going back to Project Deal we talked about earlier. So for instance, in the past, institutions and funders notoriously didn't know what was published coming out of their institutions, right? I'm overstating a little bit, but it was very difficult to keep track which of their faculty publishes where and have an up-to-date overview. Now, Project Deal, we have developed dashboards for the participating institutions so that every librarian, every OA administrator can see at any day, any time, what has been published out of the institution, right? So I see librarians now also moving into this open access world and becoming much more active, involved in the publication process, supporting their faculty, supporting their vice president for research. And this is just one simple example, these dashboards. We have spent a lot of time working with librarians, developing them in that direction of going into an open science infrastructure with active participation and contributions by librarians.
My next question is close to this discussion we actually have had, and your thoughts, Guido. In libraries, there is much, and too often, in my opinion, talk about costs and burdens of the transformation, and not on the opportunities and on the solution. And now Guido is a man for solution. At Wiley, perhaps you can give some ideas or recommendations for the libraries. What would you recommend libraries if they want to play an active role in the transformation process?
Okay, so probably I'm not in a position to give advice to librarians, but from a different angle, I truly feel that we have a shared responsibility for the science infrastructure, as we did in the past. In the past, it was simpler. You had a library and had a researcher. The researcher goes into the library buys from the publisher, and that was pretty much the game. And this has become much more complex now. We talked about all the aspects in the previous 45 minutes. So I believe librarians, OA administrators, publishers, maybe funders have a shared responsibility to build an infrastructure that researchers can be as possibly productive as they can be, because this will benefit the society. Simple as that. And I think that's a shared responsibility. And I believe rather than arguing among ourselves where the money is coming from, what we could do is, together advocate for more funding going into the system, right? And there must be a time. I mean, if you go back, it's a stretched argument, but you go back to the Baroque libraries, there was money in the system, obviously, right? Bavaria has some very nice libraries, 200-300 years old. And we should together advocate that more money is in the system to support the researchers and build the research infrastructure necessary. So that would be my answer.
Thank you very much. This is a hot topic. There is enough system enough money in the system, but we don't want to talk about this. We have only 10 minutes left, and I think this is a time for a break and to ask the audience if there are questions from the audience to the panelists. Is there any question? Has everybody a remark or a question to the topic? This is actually not the case. So is there one?
Well, if there wasn't a question, I was going to continue, if I may.
You may continue, of course.
Well, I was just thinking again, as we were talking about when you talk about cost and the burden that is perceived for the transition, and we shouldn't shy away from that to a certain degree, because of course there is that challenge, and dare I say on all sides as well. I mean, publishers are investing tens of millions in technology and infrastructure to better support all the things that we've talked about. Again, I make no apology for using the word standards again, but it's also with Wiley, with our REC system, but also all of the other things that we collectively with our other publisher colleagues are investing in. I think for me that it comes back where I started as well, about the importance of us on our side, really ensuring that we focus on the value that we bring to the system, and that when we are partnering with libraries and with institutions, we're enabling them to talk not just about the cost that they're paying, but the value that they're receiving. So they're not just buying the train ticket to Munich for €200. They're investing in a trip to Munich to attend a conference or to discover what they need to discover or to advance their knowledge. So that's where that partnership is so critical. We have to be able to enable the librarian and other institutional partners to demonstrate themselves the investment and value that paying what they are paying for our services delivers. And that for me is possibly one of the critical moments where the relationship between publisher and partner is successful, and that the conversation about cost and burden was absolutely important, and I'm not dismissing it, but it's got to be one where we can all shift that away from cost and more to value and investment.
Thank you very much. Let me touch a last point in our discussion, and let us go ahead 20 years. In a time of mass publication and in a time where 20% of every published article is never cited, could you imagine how scholarly communication could look like 20 years from now? What can you imagine, Liz, in this case?
20 years,
20 years
okay.
ago, yes.
I think there'll be a much greater diversity of forms of output that will be recognized as proper forms of scholarly output. We can see funders increasingly moving to recognizing data, preprints, and so on. Now, I don't think authors have shifted their behavior enough yet along those lines, but I see the communication of scholarly research to be much more of a continuum in future. Fewer definite endpoints, smaller pieces of information being shared on a much more rapid basis. You know, Guido talked about how speed is the most important thing to authors right now. That's absolutely true. We will develop more as a society globally, the faster we can get the outputs of research out there. It doesn't concern me that some work is never cited, or maybe cited 20 or 25 years for the first time after it's been produced. Some funder saw a proposal worthy of throwing money at. Some author, researcher, or research group found it worthy of a year, 2, 3 years worth of investigation to do that work and to write up a paper. Everything adds to our body of knowledge, and there needs to be ways now and in future for all of those forms of output to get into the public domain. So in short, I see many more diverse forms of communication, of research outputs. I see them happening on a much more timely basis, much less reliance on the 12-page article as the thing on which all assessment of a piece of work hangs, and so on.
Guido, your visionary picture 20 years from now.
Difficult. And first to go back to the uncited articles. I think there's an underlying issue here that obviously you can plan for the process of innovation, but you cannot plan for the innovation, right? If anybody would know which of the research projects will lead to a successful outcome, then that would be, I don't know, to be in the best position. So it's just not happening. So I think society can only say we fund as much research as possible. And then out of that, we see the benefits over the last 10 years, right? Take COVID. It took 9 months to develop a vaccine, right? That's 20 years ago would be totally impossible. And it kind of like counter hypothesis to what you're saying. So when I look back 20 years, when we look at Budapest and the Berlin Declaration, there was a sense like things need to change radically. And actually, I do think it has changed radically, right? If we compare the conversation we have now with the conversation we had 20 years ago, we have arrived in an open access world. So dramatic change. However, interestingly enough, there are still authors, there are librarians, there are publishers, right? So you could argue, plus ça change, plus c'est la même chose. So I would argue in 20 years, we will be in a radically improved information environment, both on the submission side, on the discovery side. But my hypothesis would be that the main actors pretty much in place still then. So I'm very confident in 20 years, your successor at ETH with our successors would have a similar conversation and similar roads, I would predict.
But looking back in the last 20 years, we really suffered both from this situation, I guess.
I agree, and maybe unnecessarily so. That's my perspective. When we went back to Budapest and Berlin, we were talking about price, but we were not talking about price pretending to talk about something else. And that kind of like make the conversation difficult. Then I think that the conversation has progressed dramatically because open access is not the solution to every problem in the world. It just isn't. It can't be, right? Open access is a tool. And now today you could see we have a much more nuanced conversation on data, process, the role of author, the role of librarians, who makes various contributions than we had 20 years ago in Berlin and Budapest, where it was much more publishers versus libraries. So I think we have luckily evolved from that less developed conversation.
Dear panelists, ladies and gentlemen, we have only 5 minutes left, and I have prepared for the last short final round question to all of you. Please finish the following sentence, and I'm starting with Ben. Ben, your sentence. Wiley will sell libraries in the future.
Wiley will sell libraries in the future.
Yes.
There's heckling from the audience.
Yes, indeed.
I think Wiley will sell libraries in the future, a partnership that evolves and transforms both libraries and publishers to a better future.
Thank you for your wise answer. Liz, your question is, as an author, I find academic publishers...
As an author, I find academic publishers... Ooh, this is a tough one. A necessity, at times extremely helpful in fulfilling my objectives, at other times unnecessarily unhelpful with putting too many barriers in the way.
Thank you very much. And Guido, the last sentence to finish for you. The partnership of libraries and publishers is in 20 years.
Just to continue what I said earlier, I hope we stay on that trajectory. I hope we have a shared responsibility for science infrastructure. I hope we divide jobs so that we create best efficiency, take our cost as much as we can, and support the researchers in the best possible way.
Thank you very much. The audience, an applause for our panelists. Thank you for your interesting discussions, for your answers. Thank you for coming and spending your time to this topic. Thank you very much. I wish you a nice book fair in the next days. Thank you.